So let's start with the basic flow of Scrum, what some of you have been learning from the source today. Let's say we have a development project with some goal. The goal could be the release of some software product. And then in Scrum, we create a cadence of checkpoints. And at each checkpoint, we have a demo. And we assess our progress in terms of working software. Then in Scrum, we do not assume that we will make progress according to some perfect plan. In fact, we reject the notion that there can be such a thing as a perfect plan. We start development, and then based on our actual progress, we reassess what we should be making different, reassess our goal perhaps even. We may have new insights, the environment may have changed. There are all kinds of reasons why we may have to change our plan. Now, the question is, where does design fit into this? And to be quite clear, with design, I mean much more than visual design. When you say designer, everybody thinks of somebody a bit weird who does lots of things in Photoshop, and that is certainly part of design. It's visual design, but it's only a small part of design. Design as a whole is much bigger. Architects, in a sense, are designers, right? It's just that most of us don't get much in touch with designers in our work. So some of us have an engineering background, few of us have a design background. So where does design fit into this? There are, based on this simple illustration, there are two possible places. One would be design could be done during execution, during the sprint. Then another option would be that design comes before execution. Now, who of you isn't familiar with the terms ready and done in the context of Scrum? I'm sure Jeff Sutherland has already mentioned that too. Now, does anybody care to explain that? Done is relatively easy. Would you like to? Some it's easier, some perhaps sometimes not. Well, to achieve it is maybe difficult, but to explain it is not so difficult. I mean, what often happens is the team shows work at the sprint review, and then they say, "Look, that's what we've done." And then the product owner may say, "Oh, great! I love it. Let's put that right into production and give it to our customers, and they can do their bookkeeping with it. And then the developers say, "Well, wait a minute. It's not that kind of done. It's not yet really tested, and there may be some bugs that the computer crashes and so on. And let's better wait another sprint until we can, put this into production." So done is the set of criteria, really, that you want to be fulfilled for something to be shown at the sprint demo. There's this definition of done. And then people found out that at the other end, at the beginning, we have a similar problem. Sometimes the team pulls backlog items into the sprint, and then they are confused. It's not very clear. What exactly should they do? How is it supposed to work? What values are supposed to be shown, and so on. And then they introduced this notion of ready. That's basically done for backlog items, right? So now we could say design should be part of execution, that would be in the sprint, and then that would lead to a done product increment. A done product increment is a well-designed product increment, something like this. And we could also say that design should come before execution, that the team should not pull backlog items into the sprint if design is not yet good, not yet thought through. These are basically the two options that we have. Now, I would like to tell you about our experience with the development of two features. The product in each case is our web application Dividend. Perhaps I should say a word or two about the Zahnärztekasse. As you may guess, if you understand German, our business is invoice processing and financial services for dental clinics. All our software development is done by one small team. Every month we have a sprint review meeting with our CEO and stakeholder representatives, and most of our software development is really internal software. Every year over 250 million Swiss francs flow through our systems, and there are always, possibilities for further automation and so on. So much of our work is really on internal software, internally used software. But then some of our software is directly used by our customers, and this feature, this web application Dividend, is perhaps the most important one at the moment. And that, I would say, falls more into this kind of software, product software. And now the question is there any difference? Klaus and I argued a bit about that. Klaus has experience of developing software for, extremely sophisticated, expensive employees, like little prima donnas, and I think in that case really there isn't any difference. But in many cases, perhaps there is actually a difference. For starters, if you develop software internally, you probably don't have any real product management expertise. You don't have any design expertise. Your users personally, they may sit in the same room or at least in the same building. You don't have a problem with scalability probably if it's only a handful of users, and so on. What I'm going to talk about, I believe, really fits better software development in the case of products. But I do think there are also lessons for internal software development. Both features I'm going to talk about are features of our web application Dividend, which is used by our customers. Now, first feature is called invoice status. What problem are we addressing with this? We do have a data feed. Our customers have, many of them have a software system. They do their reservations with, their accounting, whatever, and what they need to do as dentists in terms of administration. And many can consume this data feed, and they receive status updates. They can see, for example, whether reminders were sent, or whether an invoice was paid, when it was paid. This is a very popular feature, but not all of our customers can use it, because some don't have any software system at all, and some have software systems that cannot consume this data feed. So we decided that we offer this information also in our web application. That would be a new feature. In this case, the backlog item really was the request to offer this information in Dividend, full stop. It was up to the developers to figure out the details. So we rolled up our sleeves, and as the result of some recent internal software development, we figured out we had some nice new tables, and if we make good use of these additional tables, we can offer more detailed information. Now, we also figured out that if we use both the new tables and the old tables, and we still need the old tables, the results sometimes needed some, let's say, interpretation. But we didn't see that really as a problem. It was not that difficult to understand the flow of events. And we thought really on the whole, that was a big improvement. Our customers, for the first time, would get a full view of all events associated with one invoice. There was a release last year in December containing this feature, and overall the reaction was very positive. This is, can you see that? It's a bit difficult to see details, but this is what the overview page looks like. You can enter some search criteria here, then you get search results. Here you get a quick visual indication whether everything is okay. Green obviously means invoice paid, everything okay. Red is invoice not paid. And then you can click on the link here, and then you get details. This is what the detail page looks like. It's a simple case, invoice created, invoice paid, ready. Now, overall, the reaction to the release was positive, but it turned out many customers called and said they were confused by this new invoice status feature. This is what one of our customer service managers said. He summed up the problems with this feature as far as he became aware of it. The problem is the page with details. This is a good example. Once cases get a little complicated, the easy cases are not the problem, but once cases get a little complicated, the flow of events doesn't make sense. The text in the column status and action is confusing. What he mentions here, this example, is this one. As you can see, too many rows really. I mean, you cannot really expect anybody to work through this. Certainly not customers. But then it's worse than that. Some are really duplicates. It's not just too detailed, but there's redundancy, and then the sequence is odd. For example, at the top, you have the second. You must read it from bottom to top. The newest events are at the top. The second topmost event is invoice settled. Okay. But then at the top you have the actual payment. Now, is the invoice settled before it was paid? And then in the status column on the right, the second row, you have invoice paid, status invoice paid. But then above it, status last reminder. Now, did it get worse from there or what? It was already paid, and then again last reminder. Doesn't make sense. And then here we have invoice created, invoice created, invoice created, invoice created. Last reminder. Here also reminder, preparation, debt collection. But then suddenly again invoice created. Doesn't make sense. So I guess this feature didn't go that well. Then quote continues: for dental clinics, the history must be as simple as possible. What is more or less okay for our employees, because they see exactly the same, but they didn't complain that much. Although they may have had reason to complain, what is more or less okay for our employees may be incomprehensible to our customers. Now, this is the second feature. We call that payment data. What was the problem that we had to solve there? When dental clinics work with us, their accountants have to reconcile their accounts with accounting data from us, accounting statements from us. And they have to make manual bookkeeping entries. For example, in the case of our fees, in the case of debits and credits in relation to debt collection. And we were vaguely aware that this is a burden for our customers. And I mean, we talked to one of our biggest customers, and they said they had a lot of work with that, and we did try to help them, but this didn't really lead to anything useful. Initially, we just didn't have any clear understanding of the problem and of potential solutions. And then, last November, another very large customer had a problem. And that is really when we had this light bulb moment. But I mean, I can't be too proud of that. The customers really had to hit us over the, how do you say in English? They had to hit us over the head with this insight. They had it really. The problem was they wanted to send invoices more often. And they themselves were aware that the more frequently they send invoices, the more manual bookkeeping they have to do. And since it was a very large customer, that was a real pain for them. That was days of work for an accountant. And they didn't want this overhead. They wanted to send invoices more often, they wanted to receive money from us more often, but please, without this accounting overhead. And they even came up with a solution. They said, well, if you could give us a summary, one number per accounting entry type per month, that would be great. Then we would just have so many manual accounting entries, no matter how many invoices, how often we send these invoices per month. It's just one figure per month. And since they were used to getting lots of paper documents from us, they said, look, why don't you just create another document? You can send it by mail. That would be great. That would be very helpful. Now, our part in this is we had some experience with what accountants like in these large clinics, and we suggested, how about we provide this as an Excel spreadsheet? And that turned out to be really popular. I mean, in general, as you may know, accountants love Excel. And then, instead of implementing that right away, in an automated fashion, that our customers perhaps could download it on our website, we started with a prototype. And first, it was just about the layout. I mean, Excel obviously is a very simple user interface, but still you have a lot of options. You can display data, you cannot display data, you can change the order of the columns, and so on. This is a prototype of the customer service manager, the one who gave this shocking verdict on the first feature. And this time I think he didn't want to make this mistake again, or want us to make this mistake again. And he said, before we take the trouble and implement this, months of work perhaps, let's just, figure it out in Excel what it should look like, and that is what he did. Now, my specialization when it comes to development is really, database queries and this kind of thing. And then I had to look at this and said, oh, that is a bit difficult. This is difficult. I can't do that with our data easily. I really want it to be one query. But if we change a few things, then I can do it. And actually, the result may be even better. This is what we ended up with. I wrote a very simple, relatively simple query that gave us this data. It was just a simple SQL script. It was really just always the data of the last month, and the ID of the customer was hard-coded in the script. If I wanted to do this for another customer, it's really copy and paste and change the ID of the customer, this kind of thing. Very primitive. Then I copied the result of the query into Excel. I formatted it in Excel how I wanted it to look. And then accounting checked the numbers, and we sent it by email to our one and only test customer. And that sounds all very primitive, but actually we kept going like this for months. And the customer, the accountant of the customer, was very happy with it. He said it would save him a lot of work. That was nice to hear, but even better was it didn't take long for him to come back and say, well, you know, we still have to do accounting for the last business year. Could you perhaps give us this data in Excel for the last business year? I think that was a good sign. Then we created this for 2 more customers, where we thought that would be particularly helpful, and showed it to them, and again, very positive feedback. And only then, when we had evidence that the data in this format, in this way, is actually useful for our customers, we started to think seriously about how we could offer this. And the obvious way was to offer this as a download in our web application. This is the download page. But this is really all that was new in terms of user interface. As far as our test customers are concerned, they still get the same files. And to the extent that our test customers, our test users are representative of our customers, there's now very little risk that customers will find this confusing or completely useless. Some will find it more useful than others, I guess. We had this, we had in particular large clinics in mind, but we have indications that even small practices can make good use of this. They hand over the accounting work to a so-called Treuhänder in Switzerland, and they pay good money for it, and if he has to do a third of the work, they save some money. Even a small dental practice. So that was the development of the second feature. Now, the conclusion, obviously these are only 2 data points. Cannot say too much based on this, but as far as we are concerned, I would say design in a broad sense, designing, the user interaction, what to offer really, as part of execution didn't work very well for us, in the case of that feature at least. Before execution, worked brilliantly. We could iterate very rapidly on the Excel spreadsheet, certainly when it was just dummy data, but even with a query, it's easy to change a query. No fancy programming there. And then this prototype, if you want to call it that way, became the spec for engineering. It was handed over to the development team. Implementation was quick and painless. It was really almost a pleasure to develop this. Now, if you think back of this, you can see my background is not exactly in design. I'm not a Photoshop guru, so I went back to my ASCII skills. If you think of this diagram, ready, done. In the case of the development of the first feature, design was part of execution. In fact, the design was basically derived from the implementation. We as developers, we said, look, we have these tables, and then let's just show everything in the tables, and the result made sense to the developers, but it didn't make sense to the customers. In the case of the development of the second feature, design came before execution. It was basically, we were ready to develop it in full once the design was done. Now, when it comes to design and products, there's the obvious authority to quote. That's a quote by Steve Jobs just after he got back to Apple.
And one of the things I've always found is that you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And I've made this mistake probably more than anybody else in this room. And I've got the scar tissue to prove it. And I know that it's the case. And as we have tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers and figure out what awesome technology we have, and then how are we going to market that?
So that is really the key quote. You've got to start with the customer experience and work your way backwards to the technology. I mentioned Marty Cagan in the beginning. I think Jeff Sutherland knows Marty Cagan, perhaps, or at least Marty Cagan also came to OpenView Venture Partners once or twice. I think they did some videos there too. SVPG stands for Silicon Valley Product Group. Marty Cagan used to be Vice President of Product Development and Design at eBay. And now he's a consultant. And he's a strong advocate of getting the design right before starting with production software. Obviously, in a company like eBay, or if you think of Facebook or companies like that, I mean, if you have to scale up to a few 100 million users, then you have to be very deliberate. And if you want to iterate in this environment, you have long cycle times. Even at Facebook, where they release, like every day kind of, it takes a while to develop something really new in a way that it scales. And before you take this effort, before you spend the time of your engineering teams, in the case of companies like eBay and Facebook, really the elite, mostly Stanford graduates and so on, perhaps you should think through your design and not just think it through, but to test it. And what Marty Cagan finds, he speaks of creating a backlog of good design. When you hear that, it sounds a bit like waterfall, but really it isn't. What you have in mind when you think of rapidly iterating and getting feedback from users, he has that in mind as well. Just not with production software, not with software that has to scale to a few 100 million users. In our case, we could do it with Excel. You can sometimes do it with dummy data, sometimes you use live data, but you can cut a lot of corners in general. But what Marty Cagan would advise you to do is not to cut corners with design, and also the visual design. Try to get that right, and try to figure out if users, if it makes sense to users, and if it's valuable to users, and only then start to think seriously about implementing it for production. Not quite yet. This is a quote by Marty Cagan. That's from a good book, by the way, Inspired. Sorry, I'm jumping a little, but before this presentation, I did get in touch with Marty Cagan. I thought before quoting him so much, I should better find out if he actually likes what I'm saying. And then he said, "Oh, by the way, just a few days ago, I posted an article on this Silicon Valley Product Group blog, and basically it's the content of this presentation, very similar. The blog article, if you visit the website, you will find it quite on the top. The article is called Dual Track Scrum. Fits very neatly what we have covered here. And here it says, user experience design deals with the very difficult questions of both usability and value. It says, companies have far too much confidence in their specifications. Only documents, make sense perhaps, but usually they are wrong. Even professional people who are really good at that, maybe they fail half of the time. That's kind of the level you get at when you are really good at this kind of thing. And the rest of us, to be quite honest, most of the projects we do don't reach the potential we had in mind. And it doesn't have to be like that, at least not to that extent. The approach he suggests is to do prototyping, iterate with prototypes, get good user feedback. There's an art to that, to getting good user feedback with prototypes, and only start real development once you are sure you've got something that is probably useful. Now he says, user experience design deals with the very difficult questions of both usability and value. And in order to come up with a product that is both usable and valuable, you will need to try ideas out. Now that sounds familiar, right? Early and often. Isn't that what we say in agile development? Just try things out and iterate and so on. Now, he's actually more radical than that. He says a good user experience designer will want to try out dozens of ideas and approaches in a matter of days. And that's perhaps with user feedback, It's not just creating nice prototypes, but getting feedback on that as well. So the thought of waiting even for a 2 to 4 week sprint would be debilitating, as the frequency is an order of magnitude too slow. That is what he has in mind. It's not like he doesn't like agile development. He's a big fan of agile development. He says, really, literally, everybody should do it. And he says very good things about Scrum, right to this article. But for a real designer, and most of us, probably have never worked with such a guy, that is still way too slow. And they want to not just change a little here, a little there. They want to change the whole approach, They want to make radical changes and try to do that with an engineering team. In general, they don't like that. They are good at working with production software, and they don't want to make these changes all the time. And anyway, they are far too slow, even if they're really good. They can't do dozens of changes in a matter of days. Now, of course, there are things that we can only learn once we put software in production. And in production is also my favorite definition of done. But it's also true that we can figure out a lot of things before even writing a line of production code. And this is perhaps something we should think more about and perhaps get good at. Now, this is the end of the presentation, and I'm really curious what Jeff Sutherland has to say about this. Jeff, as far as I know, you worked very systematically with prototypes at Patient Keeper, the last company where you were CTO before you joined OpenView Venture Partners. Could you perhaps tell us a bit more about your experience there? The context and
Well, I've had many experiences with this issue. I totally agree with what you said. In the specific case of Patient Keeper, we had the benefit of having physicians as users, and because they were so demanding, if they saw an iPhone with something they didn't like on it, they'd throw it in the door and they'd scream at us. They say, until you fix that, we're never going to use the product. And in fact, we had one physician that said, one of our early releases, he threw it down and he said, I will never use a mobile device for healthcare patient treatment ever for the rest of my career. It sucks so bad. And when physicians were having problems, we like to send our developers to a hospital at least once a quarter, to go on rounds with a physician and see the physician using the mobile device at the bedside of a patient, many of them who were dying of cancer or whatever. And when they would see a physician talking to a dying patient and fumbling with that device, or worse yet, the device hung up, they got it at an emotional level that there's just no other way to get it. So it became clear to even all the developers that you could not assume anything about any application going into production unless that application had a fully functional prototype tested against a reference physician group who would approve its workflow, its look and feel, and its value. And so the development team literally started demanding of product owners. They would not write a line of code until the product owner had done that. A side effect of that was, well, first of all, the developers got prototyping tools so the product owners could do their own screen mock-ups very quickly. And with those markups, the developers also had prototyping tools that in a few hours, using the framework we had already created on the devices, we could create a fully functioning application on any mobile device. We supported most of them. So the work in a sprint for supporting the product owner was simply the normal part of supported product owner. You should allocate 5 or 10% of your sprint to the product owner. So it was viewed not as any additional work for the team. The product owner says, I need a prototype today. Okay, that's a product owner meeting, basically, with only one person, whereas most of them had more people. One of the side effects of that was not only good user acceptance, but one of the highest performing, probably, Patient Keeper had 6 or 7 teams. It's the highest performing group of 6 or 7 teams that I've ever seen. Now, practically speaking, if you go look at what Apple does, there's a good article on pragmatic marketing that says why you will never compete with Apple. And the fundamental reason is they will create a dozen fully functional prototypes of a product, and they will have a bake-off and a shootout before they decide which one to implement. And because you won't do that at your company, you will never be able to compete with Apple. This is called set-based concurrent engineering. If you look at the books on lean product development, that's what Scrum is. In lean product development, you implement set-based concurrent engineering. But in software, very few companies do. The first Scrum team did, Patient Keeper did, and so forth. I also want to make a comment on the fast iteration. In multiple companies, even before Patient Keeper, I decided that the applications needed world-class design. So, for example, what is now GE Healthcare, I was CTO. When I came in there, we had 8 different business units. Each business unit had at least 3 different products. They all had different user interfaces, and they all sucked. So I pulled in a world-class designer who I had worked with before. You cannot afford to hire these people. You have to go out and find them, and you pull them in at the right time. That's what Apple did to create the iPod. And she came in, and every night she generated 6 to 12 prototypes of the look and feel of a web product for IDX at that time, now GE Healthcare. And so it took about 3 weeks, every night, and everybody looking at 6 different options for the company to converge on, okay, this is the right one. And then when we got that, only then did we start pushing the user interface design into all the business units and all the products. So any of you who are serious about selling product software, I strongly recommend you operate in this way. This is why Apple is the most valuable company in the world, because they do it right.
I think that was an elegant lead to Jeff, so you avoid questions, right?
Yeah.
So, if anybody has questions to Jens, feel free to shoot.
Don't shoot, please.
How long is the time for the first requirement speaker and delivering the product, the end one?
In general?
In a month?
In general?
You mean the first feature you presented?
Yeah.
That was a bit special because it was part of a really big effort. We rewrote the whole application from scratch. Before it was struts, now it's Ruby on Rails. So the front end got a complete rewrite. We changed a part of the back end. Authorization was changed. And this was really one small part of the whole release. And then, for once, we got a professional designer to work with us. But it was more the, sorry to say it that way, but it's more the kind of lipstick on a pig kind of design, you know, when everything is basically done and then you say, look, make it pretty. Well, it worked to an extent. It's really a big improvement on what we had before. But in the case of this one feature, that was just not good enough. You know, you cannot develop it and then say, okay, visual designer, make it nice, and then everybody's happy. It doesn't work that way. If you haven't thought through the problem and potential solutions and evaluated options and so on and tested it, I think it's very difficult to come up with something that is really useful and is liked by customers. So in general, we are quite fast. I mean, you can ask Günther. Günther is my colleague at the Zahnärztekasse. You know, if our boss wants something fast, he gets it fast. We can release something basically immediately, or whatever we do.
Question a little late, so I'm sorry, maybe you explained that. Wouldn't it make sense maybe to have a design product backlog and do a short time box design scrum?
Well, as you perhaps could see from the ASCII slides, I'm not a designer, and I'm not. I can't speak with authority on this. But from my limited work experience, I would say for developing something really good as designer in this broad sense, you know, coming up with something novel. It's really a really good solution that nobody has thought of before. You need breakthrough insights, and the first idea is usually not the best, and you can't really schedule these breakthrough insights. You're lucky if you have one at all. So I think I remember, Jeff, that once you said at Patient Keeper you had ideas for features or something like that would hang around for months, you know. And it would take a while until they were mature enough, as it were, to be actually put into development. Probably it helps to have this Scrum kind of rhythm, but it's not so much this execution focus. The designers, I think, have to have more liberty, and you can't put them under so much pressure. I don't think you can have a design velocity. I'm not sure that makes sense.
One thing that really helped at Patient Keeper focus us, we had more backlog than we could implement for 10 years. So we had no shortage of backlog. So when the product owner came up with a new product, we weren't interested in starting on that until, in fact, the CEO made it a requirement. There had to be 4 signed contracts with customers before we would cut a line of code. And we knew we could deliver anything in 3 months, which was the time period it took a hospital to sign a contract, get the install, and come live. So it made no sense for us to cut a line of code until the deal was done. And so in terms of fast, we just matched the speed to the customer, and we forced the front end to be done properly. And in the course tomorrow we're doing here, we'll be talking about enabling specifications for things that really need proper upfront. You need what we call an enabling specification. We take that from having done a lot of patent applications. You know, securing our intellectual property by getting a patent from the U.S. Patent Office in the United States. A patent application is by law an enabling specification, which means a person outside the company could implement it from the patent without talking to the company. Well, this is exactly what you want for a ready product backlog. The developer should be able to implement it without having to go find the product owner and answer a lot of questions. It should be really clear. The average length of a patent application is 5 pages. And that was the average length of Patient Keeper's specification. So in terms of the speed of development of specifications, it was an order of magnitude faster than any kind of waterfall thing. But the fact that the product owners had to get 4 big customers to sign, it's like getting 4 big banks in Zurich to agree on they want this feature. It would take them months and a lot of design work to get everybody agreed on that this is the best design.